Hey everyone, and welcome to the November sew-along. My name is James and this is my first sew-along video. I am very excited to announce that this month's project is this magical Christmas night scene hanger. This design consists of 9 different blocks which come in the 4x4, 5x5, 6x6, 7x7 and the 8x8 hoops. So it is perfect for any size machine. In this video we will be showing you the stitch out of block 6 and block 8, as well as the construction of the wall hanging. Let's begin with block 6. Place your batting on top of the hooped up stabilizer and stitch down. Now using your applique scissors, trim any excess batting. Stitch down the placement line for fabric A, which will be the sky. Place fabric A right side up on top of the placement line and stitch down. Using your applique scissors, trim the bottom edge, leaving the excess fabric in the seams. Good job everyone! Now repeat the same applique process for the first background piece using fabric B. Remember to leave the excess fabric in the seams. Stitch the placement line for the walls of the house. Cut a piece of fabric large enough to cover the placement line and stitch down. Use your applique scissors to cut right around the stitch down line. Repeat the same applique process for the roof. Awesome! For the second background piece, repeat the same applique process using fabric C. All the applique is completed, well done! Now we will start the decorative stitching to really bring the block to life. Please follow the included instructions for these steps. Once all the stitching is complete, remove the block from the hoop. With a rotary cutter and ruler, trim the seams back to about 1/2 inch. You have now finished block 6. Moving on to block 8. For this block we are using a different technique for our applique pieces. It is called flip and fold. First, follow the same steps for attaching the batting to your stabilizer. Stitch down the placement line for fabric A. Place fabric A right side up on top of the placement line and stitch down. Using your applique scissors, trim the bottom edge, leaving the excess fabric in the seams. Place fabric B wrong side up on top of the hoop, with one edge 1/4 inch crossing the placement line, with the rest of the fabric on top of fabric A. Stitch down. Fold fabric B over and stitch down again. Trim only the bottom edge. Now repeat the same flip and fold process for fabric C. However, don't trim any fabric. Start the decorative stitch. Once all the stitching is complete, remove the block from the hoop. With a rotary cutter and ruler, trim the seams back to about 1/2 inch. You have now finished block 8. Once you have made all the required blocks for your wall hanging, lay them out on your work surface in the correct order. To begin the construction of the hanger, place the first 2 blocks right sides together and pin along the joining edge. Move over to your sewing machine and stitch the 2 together using about 1/2 inch seam. Use the same technique to join the final block onto the row. Once sewn, iron open the seam on the back of the blocks. Also give the front of the blocks a good press too. Return to your work area to begin joining the rows together. Place the first 2 rows right sides together and pin along that long edge. Using your sewing machine, stitch the 2 rows together. Again, stitching in between the lines on the back of the blocks. Repeat this same pinning and stitching process until you have joined all the rows together. Use your iron to press the seams on the back of the blocks open. Give the front of the blocks a good press too. Trim back your edges so they are nice and even. Next we will start on our borders. For this project we wanted to add some flat piping to the inside of the borders to add some layers to the hanger. First, measure the top and bottom of the hanger to get the measurements for your piping. When we measure our strips, we leave about an inch excess on each end. Cut 4 1.5 inch strips of fabric for the flat piping, which is your fabric F. Also a reminder, we do not want any joins in the fabric as this will cause them to look uneven when finished. With your iron, press the strips of fabric in half widthways, ensuring the raw edges are sitting exactly on top of each other. Lay one of the piping strips on the bottom edge of the hanger. When you do this, make sure you have the folded edge of the piping strip towards the center and the raw edge of the strip matching the raw edges of the hanger. Then pin or clip together. Stitch into place with a 1/4 inch seam. Repeat this same process for the top edge of the hanger. With your rotary cutter and ruler, trim the excess fabric from the edges. Measure the finished length of the sides of the hanger and repeat the same process to stitch the side piping strips into place. Moving on to the borders. First, measure one side edge of the hanger. Then go ahead and cut 2 strips of fabric to this length. This is your fabric G. Then proceed to cut 2 strips of batting to match. Now we are going to attach the batting to the border fabric using spray adhesive. Please refer to the instructions for the alternate option. Now place the hanger on top of the border fabric right sides together. Match one of the side edges of the runner with one of the long edges of the border fabric. Pin or clip together. Using your sewing machine, stitch the 2 together with a 1/2 inch seam. Repeat the same pinning and stitching process for the opposite side border. Trim back the batting in the seam you just created. Press both borders over flat. Take your hanger back over to your work surface and trim back any excess border fabric and batting from the sides, making the borders flush with the ends of the hanger. Using your sewing machine now, top stitch the borders to give it a neat finish. Now repeat the same process to attach the 2 end borders. But this time, remember when you measure the ends, you will need to include the extra width from the side borders to the measurement. Top stitch to finish off the borders. If needed, trim all your borders so they are even. To create the top loop for this hanger, measure the top of the hanger to give you the length of fabric I. Once you have worked out the length, cut out your strip of fabric. Then go ahead and fold the fabric in half so the shorter side is right sides together. Clip and stitch the raw edges together with a 1/2 inch seam. Press the seam you just created open. Turn the loop right sides facing out. Keep the seam towards the middle and press with your iron again. Go ahead and fold in half with the raw edges together. Press with an iron and use clips to keep in place. Move over to your machine and stitch the raw ends together. Use a 1/4 inch seam. Now place the loop on top of the hanger with the raw ends flush with the edge. Use a ruler or tape measure to make sure your loop is centered. Now pin. And secure them together with your sewing machine using a 1/4 inch seam. Great work, we are almost finished. To attach the backing, place fabric J on the table right sides up, then place the hanger on top of fabric J right sides together. Pin around the edges, leaving an opening of about 6 to 7 inches on the bottom of the hanger for turning out later. Stitch around the hanger using a 1/2 inch seam, remembering to leave the opening. Using a rotary cutter and ruler, trim the edges of the backing to a 1/4 inch from the seam, leaving an inch extra for the opening. For pointed corners, use scissors to trim the corners. Turn your hanger right way out through the opening. Use a pointy implement, we like to use a chopstick, and push out the corners. Be gentle when doing this. Give the hanger a good press. Using a needle and thread, hand stitch the opening close. You can also use fabric glue for this part. Top stitch around the borders and stitch in the ditch. All done. Yes, now you can tell all your friends that you made this beautiful Sweet Pea Christmas night scene hanger. I hope you enjoyed making this month's design. Remember to share all your beautiful hangers on our Facebook page. And best of luck in the sew along competition. P.S. You're all winners in my eyes. Make sure you go check out the Sweet Pea Essentials range on our website at sweetpea.com. That's SWPEA.com. Thanks again. This was James, and I'll see you next month.